Well, as you can see by the screen, we're just about there. Just one more to go after tonight, and then we will have completed the New Testament study. Now, somebody was asking me earlier tonight when we started, if I knew the date that we started. As far as the New Testament is concerned, I'd have to go back to my office to talk about the Old Testament and look it up. But as far as the New Testament is concerned, we started January 14th of this year. All right, is when we started the New Testament. So this helps you understand the time that now we took a break in the summer, of course, all the rest of those good things. But that tells you how long we've been working at this. And we have come down now to the last three epistles of the New Testament, and then next week we will get into the final book of the New Testament. But tonight we're going to cover three epistles: 2 John, 3 John, and Jude. And the reason why we're putting the three together is because they're so short. So we might as well put the three together, and that will help us along in our study. So just keep that in mind, that we are going to go through those three epistles tonight. Now, only one chapter per epistle, and less than 15 verses each with regard to, less than 15 verses each for 2 John and 3 John. There's more than 15 verses for Jude, but that's where we're going to go this evening. So, trust that you're ready to go, and we will begin by talking about John's second and third epistles. And when we take a look at their contribution, we were looking at John's first epistle last week, looking at the second and third epistles now. The value that they have for us is that these two short epistles give us a good picture of typical local churches, because that's who John is writing to, and the situations that they're dealing with are typical for local churches even today. Last week when we were looking at 1 John, we saw how 1 John paralleled a lot of what we deal with in the local church today. 2nd and 3rd John are no exception. And let's remind ourselves that these churches that John is writing to, both 2nd and 3rd John, these existed a half century after Jesus' ascension into heaven. So we're talking about churches about 50 years after Christ goes and takes a seat at the right hand of the Father. So with that in mind, let's deal with 2 John first. And we'll briefly deal with the authorship issue. The writer identifies himself in this letter with this title, the elder. If you take a look at the first verse of 2 John, you find that that is how he identifies himself. He identifies himself only as the elder, okay? And internal evidence and tradition point to the Apostle John as the author. Again, if you take the writings of the Gospel of John, like we did with the writings of 1 John, when we compared them, we saw the similarities between the two, the writing style, the vocabulary, the grammar structure, all the rest of that. Same thing now when you take 2 John, compare it with 1 John, take 2 John, compare it with the Gospel of John. Again, the internal and external evidence gives us a clear understanding that the Apostle John is the author of this now second letter. Who John is addressing is intriguing for this second letter, because we find that the epistle was written, quote, to the elect lady and her children. Again, we find this in the first verse of 2 John. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all those who have known the truth. Now, with regard to the elect lady and her children, what's the obvious question? Who's the lady, right? Who's the lady, who's your children? Well, the designation has two possible interpretations, okay? We can either take the elect lady and her children as figurative, okay? So if that were the case, if we were to take a look at that phrase as John using it figuratively, then the elect lady refers to a local church, or perhaps the church as a whole, okay? And her children would refer to the members of the church. Now, why would we think, again, possibility, why would we think that John was using figurative language to refer to the church and its members? What's happening during these days as John is writing? Persecution, all right? And so that stands to reason why perhaps John would use figurative language. Now, there are some who think that indeed John was writing to a literal elect lady, okay? And if this were the case, and we go back into the original language, we're not going to go through all that detail for you, of course, but if this elect lady is to be taken literally, then it may have been an unnamed lady that was familiar to John, or her name, if we go back into the original Greek language, her name might have been Syria or Electa, all right? And that's what some think with regard to possible interpretation of this, the elect lady and her children. My tendency is to go to the figurative, okay? Just in my mind, it makes more sense for those who go to the literal interpretation, and there are many who go to the literal interpretation. That's fine. It doesn't bother me any. I don't think it changes any of the content, but it's just interesting to discuss and talk about who this elect lady and her children are. I tend to take it more of a figurative way. And so what we then come to is that the lady, if we're going with a literal interpretation, is believed to have been a Christian friend of John. She was the mother of children. She was well known in her community, and whose sister's children were perhaps residents even of Ephesus. And that's how some have come to that particular conclusion, especially with a literal interpretation. Now, as far as the date and place that it was written, it's basically the same as what we talked about with 1 John, okay? So it was written around AD 90, okay, so 90 AD, almost 100 years after the turn from before Christ to after death. And again, the city of Ephesus would be the place where John was probably writing this letter as well. Now, there was some question and concern with regard to canonicity. Let me remind you what we're talking about here when we're talking about canonicity. Each of the 66 books that we have in our Bibles are part of what we would call the canon, or the books that were determined to be authentic as far as the scriptures are concerned. All right, those 66 books. And for the writing of 2 John and 3 John, they were not recognized as Holy Scripture by the church as quickly as John's other writings. John's Gospel was quickly recognized as being part of the canon. Revelation was recognized as part of the canon quite quickly, along with John's first letter. But 2nd and 3rd John had a little bit of a delay in their acceptance into being canon. And this was mainly because the letters were really brief. Okay, because of the brevity of the letter, because of their appearance as merely private letters. Again, he's addressing in his second letter to the elect lady, and the third letter, we'll get there in a minute, he's talking specifically, or writing specifically to a fellow by the name of Gaius. Because they're personal, because they're brief letters, only a few verses, this is one of the reasons why questions came up with regard to, do we make this part of the canon or not? And so there was a lot of discussion with regard to it, but as always, the internal and external evidence strongly suggested and brought these letters in favor of being part of the canon. So, 2 John was, again, I'm going to use the phrase because I can't resist. 2 John's letter was kind of a Johnny-come-lately to the canon, right? But it is still part of the canon. So that's background with regard to 2 John. Again, because of its brevity, we haven't got a lot of background here. So let's go basically to the prominent subject now of this letter. And we find that the first 3 verses of the letter, John deals specifically with the whole topic of truth. Notice it again as we go back to the letter. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in, notice the word truth. And not only I, but also all those who have known thee, there's the word again, truth, right? Because of the, we come across the word again in verse 2. Truth, because of the truth, which abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with you from God the Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, in, there's the word again, truth and love. So 4 times, just in the first 3 verses, and most of those first 3 verses are the salutation, or the greeting of the letter, and we find John concentrating on the whole area of truth. And then, as we go further in the letter, John then concentrates in the next 3 verses on the whole aspect of commandment. Notice what he writes. I rejoice greatly that I have found some of your children walking in truth, as we receive commandment from the Father. And now I plead with you, lady, not as though I wrote a new commandment to you, but that which we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. This is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, that as you have heard from the beginning, you should walk in it. So, not only is the word truth continually repeated, but we find the word commandment continually repeated now through these next three verses. Verses 4, 5, and 6. By the way, verse 4, if you notice, John has slipped the word truth in there again. All right? So, John talks about truth. He talks about the commandments. And he also, in the rest of the letter up to verse 11, verses 12 and 13 are the farewell greeting that John has at the end of his letter. But in these verses now, John then enters into his teaching. Notice what he writes, verse 7. For many deceivers have gone out of the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver, and notice the term again, uses it in the second letter, as he did in the first letter. Talks about these false teachers as being deceivers and an antichrist, all right? Teaching against the principles of who Jesus is. And notice for John, same as he did in his first letter, he does in the second letter. What are they denying? They're denying that Christ came in the flesh, right? That God is incarnate, or Jesus is the incarnate Son of God. Verse 8, look to yourselves that we do not lose those things we work for, but that we may receive a full reward. Whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive him into your house nor greet him, for he who greets him shares in his evil deeds. As we go through that teaching, do you see some of the common denominators again that John had in his first letter, now that he's writing in his second letter, right? He's talking about the deceivers or the false teachers being antichrist. He talks about that in the first letter. Notice as well, when we get into verse 9, whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He talked about that in the first letter. Okay? Second part of that verse, he who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. What was the main topic of John's first letter in the first part? He talked about the fellowship that exists between the Father and the Son. We see it repeated for us here in the last part of verse 9. And so you see some of the connections that are happening between the first letter and the second letter. And that takes us into the prominent subjects with regard to 2 John. That's basically all we have to talk about with regard to 2 John. So before we get into 3 John, any questions or thoughts with regard to 2 John? Go ahead, Karen.
If these were private letters, then how did they become public that someone happened to even put in the Bible?
Well, that then begs the question, were they private letters?
Yeah.
Right? The 3 John letter certainly was, in the fact that it was written to Gaius, but again, John deals, and we'll talk about this when we get into the 3rd letter, John is dealing with the church that Gaius is part of, and some things that need to happen. If we're going to look at the elect lady as being codenamed for the church or a group of local churches, then it's not as a private letter as maybe assumed if you're going to go with literal. Okay? So, again, we come back to that question. The elect lady that he's addressing here, is he addressing a particular person or an individual, or is he addressing the church? And in my estimation, I think what he's addressing here is a church or a group of churches that he's in leadership of. Hence why the letter would be more public. Okay? All right. Does that help you there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts there?
He also says, I have much to write to you, but I don't want to use paper and ink.
Yeah. But I hope to come to you and speak face to face, that our joy may be full.
So that's probably another clue that it wasn't just to...
Yeah, I tend to take that side. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's go now to 3 John. We'll deal with some background here. Again, when we talk about author, when we talk about date, when we talk about place written, as far as the author is concerned, we're talking again about John the Apostle. Again, strong evidence, again, when you compare the wording, the phraseology, the grammar, the syntax, all the rest of it, it is a very strong argument. And the date and place written are essentially the same as 2 John. So again, we're talking about AD 90, and we're talking about this letter being written in the city of Ephesus again. All right, so that makes that fairly simple. Now, what's interesting here in 3 John, when we talk about who John writes this letter to, 3 John is addressed to a man. His name is Gaius, okay? Whereas 2 John is addressed to the elect lady. So, 2 John, we're not really sure who the recipient or who the addressee is, but we're more certain as to who the addressee is as far as 3 John is concerned. But keep in mind, even though the name is given as to who he's addressing this letter to, Gaius is, well, we have no way of identifying who this Gaius was. All right? Now, the reason why we can't is because the name itself was one of the most commonly used names in the Roman Empire. Okay? So it was as common as the name John or the name Smith or what have you that we would use to equate it in our own culture today. And even as we take a look at the New Testament itself, we find the name Gaius several times in the New Testament. For example, there's the Gaius of Macedonia. We find him in Acts chapter 19. Most likely not the same Gaius that John is writing to here. Okay? Also, we come across a fellow by the name of Gaius, and he's of Derbe in the next chapter in Acts, and he's a different Gaius from the one of Macedonia. Okay? When we go into Romans 16, we find another Gaius, and he's of Corinth. All right? So we found in the New Testament so far, we found 3 different Gaiuses. Okay? That helps us to understand the commonality of that particular name during the days of the Roman Empire. And then there is a Gaius who Paul baptized. We find him in 1 Corinthians 1. He may have been the same as the Gaius of Corinth, but we don't know that for certain. But we have another Gaius in 1 Corinthians. So, with just a rudimentary summary of the New Testament, we find the name Gaius 4 times, and none of them refer back to the Gaius that John writes to in 3 John. Okay? So that's why we have a difficulty, even though this is a letter to Gaius, all right? We don't know which Gaius he's referring to, all right? We don't know anything about him, all right? Now, there is no reference in 3 John to Gaius as being an official in the church, okay? Often in these estimations or these mentions of Gaius, they may have had some church leadership aspirations or church leadership positions. There's no evidence in 3 John, as John writes this letter, that Gaius has any official position in the church. In fact, but the best we can do is he may have been an active lay member, a personal friend of John, to get down to the bottom of who Gaius was. But again, that's as far as we can go with that. We can't go any further. But what also is a little more interesting with regard to this letter, as opposed to the second letter, is the occasion for why John writes. The reason why John is writing this particular letter is because there is another fellow in the church that John is writing to. His name is Diotrephes. And what John was doing was he was setting up some messengers to go to the church that Gaius was at to begin working with them and teaching them some of the things with regard to the doctrines and the teachings of the apostles. And this fellow by the name of Diotrephes was rejecting those messengers that John was sending. And so they were being sent to the church. Diotrephes would meet them at the city gate and say, you know what, we don't need you. We don't want you here. Sorry that there's been a mix-up, but we really don't, we aren't all that interested in what you have to say. And they would say, but we've come representing John, and Diotrephes would say, well, it doesn't matter who you represent, we don't want you here. And he was kind of cutting them off at the pass and not allowing those messengers to come in. So as John writes his letter to Gaius, which Gaius and Diotrephes were both members of this church, what John is helping Gaius understand is what he needs to do in response. So if we go to verse 9 of 3 John, notice what John writes. I wrote to the church But Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which he does, prating against us with malicious words, and not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. All right, so basically what John is writing to Gaius about is he says, okay, when I get there, wherever there is, when I get there, we'll deal with Diotrephes then. Okay? And so that would seem to reason then that John has some type of authority, okay, with regard to this church or the group of churches that he would be residing over. And when he gets there, they will deal with the issue with Diotrephes and what he's doing. So that gives us the background of this third letter. That then takes us again to the prominent subjects of this letter. And this is one of those letters that talks about the local church. In fact, when we take a look, if you were to take a look at all of the letter of 3 John, you would find that, again, what John and Gaius is dealing with, especially with regard to Diotrephes, is nothing new. It's really nothing new. In fact, we would even find, not this church, of course, but we would find in other churches where people aren't necessarily getting along and not doing the right things, and they need to be talked to and try to come to some type of resolution. So, the local church, line by line, as you go through the letter of 3 John, line by line, the prominent issue that John is dealing with here is the issues of the local church. But he also deals with, in verses 5 through 8, he deals with the whole aspect as well of Christian hospitality. Notice as we pick it up in verse 5, beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the brethren and for strangers, who bore witness of your love before the church. If you send them forward on their journey in a manner worthy of God, you do well, because they went forth from his name's sake, taking nothing from the Gentiles. We therefore ought to receive such, that we may become fellow workers for the truth. There's that word again. You notice it? Truth, right? So he deals with the issue of Christian hospitality in this letter. Even talks about in this letter the value of warm relationships. In fact, this is where John's the end of John's writing, especially in this letter, ends on what we call a bright, warm note, because notice the last two words of verse 14. In fact, we'll pick it up in verse 13. I have many things to write to you, but I do not wish to write to you with pen and ink. Does that sound familiar, Gene? Yeah, it sounds familiar to 2 John, right? But I hope to see you shortly, and we shall speak face to face. Peace to you. Our friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. When we greet people, it's a lot warmer in our experience of greeting people when we greet them by name rather than not greeting them by name. True? True? I do this sometimes, when you're in the grocery store or whatever, in a particular store and or a restaurant or whatever, and the person has their name tag on. Okay? What I will often try to do is I will try to speak with them using their name. So I will, let's say for example, the cashier at the grocery store, her name is Jean. And when she gives me my change, I say, well, thank you, Jean. Thank you for helping me today, right? That's a warmer response than just thank you, right? And we find John does that in his letter. The words that he uses in his letter are an appropriate reflection, really, of the man who wrote them. Because remember how John is referred to. The Apostle John was referred to as the Apostle of? Go ahead, Karen. Of love. Yeah, the Apostle of love. We see this being brought out, especially in the third letter that John writes. So, as short as 2 John and 3 John are, we see the value of both those letters for us, even as the New Testament church today. Before we now go into Jude, any questions or thoughts with regard to 3 John?
How would they have dealt with this man who was letting him through? What would be the recourse?
We have no idea how they dealt with him because there's nothing recorded. There's nothing recorded. So we haven't come across any meetings of especially called business meeting at a church or anything like that with the name Diotrephes, and we haven't come across any of that type of stuff. So we really don't know what happened. All we can do is speculate. All right? If it went poorly, Diotrephes was probably disciplined. If it went well, then Diotrephes would be, would be asking for forgiveness, and the church would be restoring him, and so on. So it went one of two ways. It went one of two ways. That's all we know. Any other thoughts with regard to John?
And how do the second and the third, okay, how do they who decided that they would be canonized?
Oh, well, that was a long process.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a long process. We haven't really got time to get into all of that.
Yeah.
I could spend a full evening on helping you understand how the canonization process went.
Okay, that's fine.
It was a long process, many people involved, and so on. That's as far as I can go without having it hijacked. All right. Any other thoughts there with regard to 3 John? All right, but let's go to Jude. Jude is one of, I think, with regard to all of the general epistles that we have, and when we talk about the general epistles, we start at what? James, right? Hebrews, 1st, 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. I think Jude's the one that's often forgotten. It's squeezed in between the joining epistles and Revelation, and Jude, I think, is often forgotten. And it's to our detriment when we do this. Because the Epistle of Jude is a passionate plea to Christians to beware of spiritual contamination by evil people. All right? A lot of the other epistles, they will mention a little bit about this, okay, but they don't really go into a lot of depth. Peter goes into more depth than any of them. But what we have here is that Jude really begins to concentrate on this particular area. And it's interesting because Jude had originally intended to write a doctrinal epistle. He talks about this in his letter. He talks about what his original intent was, that he was going to write about, but he found that you know what, because of the condition of what was happening, or the circumstances were happening, he found that he couldn't resist. He had to deal with something more than just dwelling on the grand subject of salvation. What was happening was that false teachers were infiltrating the church. Okay? And Jude had become quite concerned about this, because with the infiltration of the false teachers, along with that, there were immoral persons who were coming into the Christian circles, and their influence had become so widespread that Jude felt compelled. He felt that he had no choice, but he had to deal with what was going on. And so, as it says here, Jude was constrained by the Spirit to devote most of his letter to warning his fellow believers about that serious threat. The serious threat of false teachers, immoral people, infiltrating the church. So, when we get down to authorship issues, when we get down to who Jude is addressing here, Jude identifies himself in the letter. We find it in the first verse. First word of the first verse. What do we find, class? We find the word what? Jude, Jude, a bondservant of Jesus Christ and brother of James. And so we find several things here in his identification of himself. As far as his name is concerned, his name is Jude. As far as his kinship is concerned, he's the brother of James. And because he is the brother of James, then his relation to Christ that he talks about here is that he calls himself a servant of Christ. Or literally, as we find it in the original, we find the term bondservant. This is how he identifies himself. His name's Jude, he's the brother of James, and he's a bondservant of Christ. Now, who is the James that Jude is referring to? Good question. Strong reasons here, and again, we haven't got the time. I could go into it, but we haven't got the time because we're skimming across the surface, right? Strong reasons for believing that this James was the half-brother of Jesus, the same one who wrote the epistle of James. Okay? So James, who wrote his epistle, half-brother of Jesus, Jude being the brother of James, then by default makes Jude also a half-brother of Jesus. All right? So, if you want to wow your friends and neighbors, you can tell them that, you know what, in the New Testament, there are 2 letters by the half-brothers of Jesus. James being one, Jude being the other. And those to whom Jude wrote his letter may have been members of Jewish churches in Palestine or Asia Minor. And the reason for that is probably this is where Jude was ministering at this time. All right? So, this is what makes the letter of Jude a little more intriguing. James is not the only one that has a relation of Jesus writing, but Jude is the other one as well. Remember I talked about Jude being often the forgotten general epistle, right? As far as when this letter was written, we're suggesting that this letter was written somewhere around AD 67, AD 68, okay? Now, with that year in mind, AD 67, AD 68, what would be significant about that? And I'll give you a hint here. AD 67, AD 68 is close to what major historical Mideastern event back in that day. And, you know, when we're talking about AD 70, what happened in AD 70?
Temple was destroyed.
Temple was destroyed. Jerusalem was overtaken by the Roman Empire, and the temple was indeed destroyed. Notice how close Jude's letter is to that particular event in time. So shortly before the fall of Jerusalem at the hands of the Roman Empire, Jude writes this letter to the church or the churches that he is ministering to. And when we get down to the reason, the occasion, the purpose behind Jude writing his letter, of course Jude clearly states in his epistle, indeed what impelled him to write what he did. And here's why he was writing. The leaven of such evils as gross immorality, antinomianism, rejection of the lordship of Christ, and mockery was beginning to spread in the churches through the influence of certain people. In case you're wondering what antinomianism is, that is a philosophical term used to talk about without law, okay, or against law, okay, antinomianism. So it was getting back into the days of, remember the time of the judges when we were studying our Old Testament? And what was the common phrase for the description of the people and what the people were like back in the days of the judges? Everyone did that which was right in their own eyes, right? That's antinomianism, okay? We create our own law. We create our own law. And this is happening, but it's not just happening in the community. What Jude is concerned about, and he's not concerned because it's happening in the community. He's concerned because it's happening in the church. Okay? The influence of all of this is infiltrating into the church as a result of certain people, certain false teachers, deceivers, who have infiltrated the church and are now wooing and deceiving the people who are part of the church itself. This is why Jude is writing his letter. He's saying this has got to stop. This has got to stop. We can't tolerate this anymore. Okay? Wow. Do we have to look long and hard at the church of the New Testament today, right? To talk about gross immorality, antinomianism, rejection of lordship. In fact, this antinomianism against law, or even rejection of lordship of Christ. I was just reading today, the Christianity Today magazine came in the mail today, and they had done a survey of the evangelical church and their feelings with regard to certain points of doctrine. And as I was looking, I'm like, wow, we have come so far over to the other side. It wasn't even funny, and it just reminded me of what Jude was dealing with and what he was needing to write about in his letter. Jude was also one that had some struggles with the whole aspect of canonicity. Like 2nd and 3rd John, Jude was not recognized as canonical as early as were the longer books of the New Testament. And again, it was due to its brevity. It was due to its non-apostolic authorship. Jude was never an apostle. Okay? It was due as well to the controversial character of the letter. And this letter is indeed controversial, not just in its content, but even his content, and we'll get into this in a little bit, even controversial in some of the sources that Jude uses in his letter, because he uses some apocryphal writings as source material in his letter. So there's some controversial character in his letter, and well, we talked about it there. The apparent use of apocryphal sources. These all were things that delayed the canonicity, but never rejected the canonicity of Jude. Acceptance did come, And the epistle is deservedly finding its place among the other inspired New Testament books. So, with that in mind, let's again go to those prominent subjects now of this letter. And what Jude deals with here is the judgments of God. And he deals with them in this way. He cites past judgments of God. Notice as we go to verse 5 of Jude, notice what he writes. But I want to remind you, though you once knew this, that the Lord, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Here's the past judgments that Jude cites with regard to these past judgments of God. When he's talking about, saving the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. What judgment is he referring to? He's referring to the first generation of the Israelites, right, who refused to go into the promised land because they did not believe God's promise. Okay, there's the past judgment of God. The angels who do not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he is reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Many people think that that is a reference back to Genesis chapter 6, okay, where God judges the fallen angels who cohabitate with the daughters of the earth. And then, of course, Sodom and Gomorrah, we know about that as well. So those are those past judgments of God. And what Jude does here is he uses these past judgments to strengthen the prophecies of judgment to still come. So in other words, what he's saying here is, listen, if God was willing to judge back then, what makes you think he's not willing to judge today? Okay? So notice as we pick it up in verse 13. In fact, we're going now to the last part of verse 13. Wandering stars, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Now Enoch, the servant from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of the saints, to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These are grumblers, complainers, walking according to their own lusts, and they mouth great swelling words, flattering people to gain advantage. And so here's what Jude is doing with regard to these past judgments of God. He's saying, now God was willing to judge back then. With what is happening now, and he even cites Enoch's prophecy, okay, which, as far as we can tell, Enoch's prophecy comes out of some type of apocryphal work, okay? That's as close as we can get to it, all right? And he's using that to help his readers understand God is going to judge today. Who is he going to judge? He's going to be judging. And he mentions here, right? Grumblers, complainers, walking according to their own lusts, they mouth great swelling words, flattering people to gain advantage. Right? God is going to judge them as well. So, the sins and the sinners of judgments are graphically described for us here in these verses. Right? Verse 8, likewise, also these dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries. Yet Michael the archangel, in contending with the devil when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke you.
Can you explain that, Pastor?
Yeah, basically Michael the archangel did not have the authority and knew he did not have the authority to rebuke the devil. That's why he says, I'll leave that up to God. It's his responsibility. Those who want to enter into such things like spiritual warfare and speaking against the devil and all the rest of that, don't read Jude.
So why would they be arguing about Moses' body?
We have no idea.
Oh.
Yeah, we have no idea. But Jude refers to it, right? And helps us to understand who has the authority. Even Michael the archangel understood that he did not have that authority. It's only God who has that authority. Something to keep in mind when we start to, as Jude talks about it, using great swelling words, flattering people to gain advantage, where we say, because I'm a child of God, I have the authority to do this and I have the authority to do that. Wait a minute, Michael wasn't that foolish. why should we be? Another story for another day. Verse 11, woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, have run greedily in the error of Balaam the prophet, for profit, and perished in the rebellion of Korah. These are spots in your love feasts, while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. They are clouds without water, carried about by the winds, laid on in trees without fruit, twice dead, pulled up by the roots, raging waves of the sea, foaming up their own shame. Who is Jude talking about here? He's talking about the false teachers. And he uses graphic language to help his readers to understand the coming judgment that will come upon them. Jude writes to warn his readers about these awful judgments that are to come. Not on them as a church, but upon the false teachers, as they will have to give an account to God. By the way, this is just as poignant for the false teachers of today. Right? Because the scriptures remind us we all must give an account to God. So if we're going to start using and saying great, big, boastful, flattering things, let's be careful, because judgment's coming. And when judgment comes, doesn't matter what kind of words, flattering words you use, it's not going to work, right? And so we have to be careful about that. So that's why I made that side comment, right? People who are, bragging about the great power that they have because they're a child of God and all that, so they can do this, and they can do that, and they have authority, and this person doesn't have authority, and that person doesn't have authority. Wait a minute here. Let's read Jude again. Let's make sure that we're, as Paul warned his readers in Romans, let's not be thinking of ourselves higher than we ought to think, right? And Jude reminds us of that. Well, you're going to get me going on this, and then I'm going to be way off base. So let's carry on. Another topic, prominent subject. Before we leave that, it's here where Jude is giving positive counsel, again, to guard Christians against the snares of ungodly people. Okay? And we have to be wise to that and thinking of that. Angels is another topic that is a major topic for prominent subject for Jude, because angels are part of his message. Again, note the two references that we have already. Jude talks about fallen angels, right? Angels who did not keep their proper domain, as is written about in verse 6. And then he talks about Michael the archangel. This is the only place in the entire Bible, okay, where you have direct reference, okay, to Michael the archangel. Now, there's other angels that are referenced to in the scriptures. There is only one other that is referenced by name. Remember? You remember him? Gabriel. And where does Gabriel come in? You remember? Yeah, with Mary, all right? But this is the only place in the entire New Testament where we find talk about Michael the archangel. That's all we know. Scripture's only mentioned him once, in one little verse in the book of Jude. Okay? So we can't go too far out on a limb with regard to that, but we know that Michael would be in the realm of the angels that are following God, and there's also these fallen angels that are being reserved for judgment, angels who do not keep their proper domain. Basically.
What's the difference between an angel and an archangel?
Well, the only thing we can figure out with regard to an archangel, doing the etymology on the word, would be he was a head angel. Okay? Now, head of what? How many are there? All the rest of that, the scriptures don't tell us. But he has some type of authority. Okay? And that's, we'll have to leave it there. That's all we know.
Now, Michael the archangel, is he not also mentioned in Daniel 10:13?
It's possible that he is, yes. Yeah.
That he was kept for 21 days as he was going to help someone because he was fighting with the spirit prince.
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah. So the only mention of Michael then would be in the New Testament would be in Jude. Okay, mentioned also in Daniel. Okay. Now, there's some who want to argue that that may have been a different angel, but I think we're starting to split hairs at that point, right? And we don't want to do that. Okay. Any other thoughts there? All right. Let's go to the SOA question. do each time that we are together. Three things that I think we need to keep in mind with regard to these three final epistles, or the general epistles that we're looking at in our New Testament. First of all, this. Let's remind ourselves that these epistles help us to understand what it means for a follower of Christ to walk in the truth. It's a phrase that John uses, especially in his second letter. If we want to know what it is like to be followers of Christ who, as John describes them, walk in the truth, read these letters. These give us great understanding as to what it means to walk in the truth. It keeps us, again, away from that fallacy of thinking that once I have my relationship with Christ solidified, I have my ticket in my back pocket, so to speak, that's all we have to do from here on in. No. Our relationship with Christ, when it begins, that's just the beginning of the journey, because the rest of that time that we celebrate relationship with Christ, we are to be growing, we are to be walking, we are to be living our lives in a way that reflects the choice or the decision that we've made with regard to coming into relationship with Christ. And John and Jude remind us of that again. Coming to Christ and having a relationship with Him is just the beginning. Walking with Him is what we are commanded to be doing in the rest of the days that God gives them to us. The other thing that these letters do for us is to give practical lessons that can be applied to our lives today. Again, as you read through especially 2nd, 3rd John, and Jude, you will find things in here that apply to our lives today. Where again, we are diverted again from that fallacy of thinking, the Bible, as great as it is an ancient book, and this is true. But sometimes we get caught in this fallacy that because the book is so ancient that it has no application to us in the day and age in which we live. That there's nothing that can be further from the truth. How do we know how to live in this day and age in which we live? This helps us. And again, these final three epistles in the New Testament, 2nd, 3rd John, and Jude, help us with those practical lessons that can be applied to our lives today. And then thirdly, these epistles also help us to see the forces that threaten our churches today. That we need to be careful about the things that we are seeing and witnessing and sometimes even purchasing in the name of Christ, right? That there are people who are infiltrating the church that claim to be great ambassadors and ministers for Christ, but when you listen carefully to some of the words they use, and as Jude describes it, these great flattering words and all the rest of it, we begin to see that the substance of what they have to share with us is very, very shallow when we compare it to what the Scriptures teach. Understand, folks, there are people out there who claim to be ministers of Christ that are no closer to being with Christ than that garbage can over in that room, over in that corner of the room. Because they are ones who have great influence, but all they teach is lies. And unfortunately, people are buying their books and their DVD sets and contributing money to their ministries, hand over fist, only to find that in the end it has been all for naught, as they have been involved in those things. I think of my dear grandmother who lived to be 103, and some of the ministries that she would use her limited income and some of the ministries that she gave her money to, and it was tragic. It was absolutely tragic because they did nothing for her. They did nothing for her. And found out later on, right, that all of that money was used for ill purposes and was not used for any ministry whatsoever. I mean, I need to be careful here. We're not trying to paint everybody with the same brush and the same color. But let's be careful. And these epistles remind us, you know what? The church, because of its effectiveness, it is under attack. The church, because of its effectiveness, there are ways and means by which the evil one is trying to infiltrate the churches to get us off base and off what the real mission is. And we need to be careful about that. And these three epistles help us with that. So, the next time you're watching the Miracle Channel, the next time you're watching the Day Star, be careful, because there's lots on there that is the exact same description of what Jude talks about in his letter specifically. Well, I'm going to have to leave it there. Maybe unfair that I'm leaving it there, but I'm going to have to leave it there. And when we get together next time, hey, let's do this. Let's talk about Revelation, which is what you've been dying to get into anyway, right? And anyway, we will do that. But for now, this is where we're at. And go ahead.
Oh, it'll take 3 weeks.
Oh, no. We'll do it in one night. Yeah, we'll do it one night, just as we did with all the other 65 books. We'll do it in one
We
night.
done it once and it took about 3 months.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to do it in one night, all right?
And I got all my answers still under mine.
Oh, there you go. Okay, all right. Let's pray together. Father, thanks again for your word and how it helps us in this day and age in which we live. We thank you for these 3 short epistles. Those epistles that, even though they are so small, help us a great deal in our walk with you today. Father, as we read and as we think and as we ponder and as we apply, help us again to continue to be faithful to you and your word. And we will pray it because of God our Father, Jesus Christ our Savior, and the Spirit of God who indwells us.